Through contacts from Lee Van Wyken, we were able to arrange for a representative from the American Institute of Biological Sciences to come and speak with us. She's the Public Policy Associate, a very recent hire of that organization, as I understand. Ms. Holly Meninger.
All right, thank you very much for coming today. I really appreciate it. You'll find that some of the things I'm going to talk about today, while not exactly related to, well, not necessarily going to help you get a job, they're going to be dealing with communication skills that you'll find are very similar to the things that you heard earlier today. Before I continue, I'd just like to briefly talk about AIBS, the American Institute of Biological Sciences. We are an umbrella professional society. WSSA is a member. We represent nearly 200 smaller professional societies related to the non-medical biological sciences. And in our public policy office, we represent the interests of those groups in Washington, D.C. So I'd just like to start by pointing out that there is more communication of and about science today than at any other time in history. Through the print media, with books, magazines, newspaper sections devoted to science, broadcast media, their radio shows, television programs completely dedicated to science, and digital, the digital world. So everything from blogs to podcasts to websites dealing with science. Thus, the opportunities for scientists to become engaged in this communication have never been greater. However, scientists have been very timid and hesitant about talking to the media. And so my goals today are sort of threefold. One, I'm going to try to convince you that talking to the media about science is a good idea, and you'll find it to be mutually beneficial. Two, I'm going to provide you with some tips and tools that will make you successful in doing so. And three, talk about how you can actually become engaged in media outreach. I should also point out that I am talking to you today as a biologist, not as a PR consultant. I just recently got my PhD in biology from the University of Maryland. And so most of the experiences that I've had working with the media have really been based on my experiences doing media outreach in graduate school. I was involved in this huge public media blitz, I guess, during the 2004 emergence of the periodical cicadas, during which time I had a lot of experience talking to the media, and even eating cicadas on TV. No good. So first, why should you interact with the media? What are some compelling reasons? Well, first, most of you, particularly in academic careers, have research that are funded by grants that are the result of federal tax dollars. And so you have a responsibility to the public to show them how their money has been spent, and to show them that your research is worth spending, and what is the return to the public. A number of grants, particularly from the USDA and the NSF, also have outreach components to them. And so speaking with the media is one way to do outreach on a very large scale. And in fact, the National Science Foundation, in evaluating research grants, has this broader impact criterion, where they look for, and this is directly from their website, broad dissemination to enhance scientific and technological understanding. It's very important, particularly to the NSF. This should go kind of without saying, but when you talk to the media, you get your name in print, you now have name recognition. Not only do you get to see your name in the newspaper, but typically the name of your organization or institution, and very often the name of your funding source will appear. So this is just an article from the Baltimore Sun, where Dr. Golden was called out as an associate professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins, and so the people at Hopkins were very excited, and it talked specifically about his specialty. This increased visibility in the media will then attract attention, both from public and private funding sources, potentially future employers. So as a graduate student, the more engaged you become in media outreach, the odds are that somebody may have seen you on TV or your name in the paper. And as a faculty member, you have the potential then to recruit new graduate students, employees who have heard about your work. I should say, with attracting attention, you would be surprised about where I've been recognized for some of the work that I've done on TV, from versus dinners, and even The Gap, I've actually got recognized by some person, so which is weird. How many times have you looked at an article in the newspaper and they are talking about a recent research development or something that had recently been published in Science or Nature, and oftentimes that article is sort of distilling this very complex scientific information, and in many cases it's being done so by someone without scientific background. And so oftentimes some of the key points are sort of lost in that translation of science. You're more likely to improve the accuracy of reporting on your work if you, the person who did the research, are the one to comment. Okay, I hope you have been compelled that talking to the media is a good idea. So how have you been involved? How does the media find you? And in many cases, you'll find that you actually want to find them when you have something really exciting to talk about. The first is just being active in your field. So actively publishing. Again, this is something that I've talked about for promotion and getting a job, but this is also how the media finds you. Presenting at conferences. A number of conferences will actually have media kits that they send out prior to the conference, and if you're doing cutting edge work, you may have an interview with a reporter. Making yourself findable. So it's really important to have a research website so that if someone Googles something about, say, an invasive weed, and you're doing active work in that, your name pops up on Google. And I'd also like to point out that service to professional societies is actually one way to sort of connect yourself to the world of public relations folks. By serving on public relations committees, public policy committees, being known to the professional staff at the society, you can then make yourself sort of available as a go-to person when the media approaches that as professional staff looking for an expert in the field. The next three items, press releases, public information officers, and lists of experts, are all things that institutions often do, or people that institutions have available, and I'm going to be talking about those in just a moment. So a public information officer is a professional who typically works in a media relations office or communications office at a university or institution, and they're sort of an expert in the field. They act as a liaison between the institution and the media. Their job very frequently is to write and distribute those press releases. They're a contact person for the media, so they know reporters, they know who are the sort of interested media outlets in your area, and they frequently will be ones coordinating interviews if you have an exciting story to tell. Further, they provide a lot of advice and strategies for how to interact with the media, so beyond what I'm talking about today. And they're also very familiar with institutional initiatives and policies, so that you, if in an interview, you may receive advice about sort of not stepping outside of your boundaries or speaking on behalf of the university about the topic. I would say that if you are interested in sort of becoming involved in media outreach, talking to the public information officer at your university or institution is probably one of the best things that you can do to get involved in this type of work. Frequently, those media relations offices will also maintain a list of experts. So by talking to the PIO, you can then get yourself included on this list of experts, which then that office makes available, typically on a news site or on sort of the website of that communications office. That's a go-to place for reporters and journalists who are interested in a particular story. Typically, lists of experts are organized by topic and subject area. So this is an example from the University of Maryland News Desk, where if you were interested in doing, as a reporter was interested in doing a story on the Chesapeake Bay, they could go and find 14 different faculty members at Maryland who have interest in that and who have done related research, and also their contact information is located there. A number of professional societies are also compiling lists of experts, and so that you could also make yourself available that way. Okay, so what do you do when the media calls? Your first inclination might be to be starstruck. Oh, you want to talk to me? This is fantastic. But I'm going to encourage you to pause first. Don't necessarily say, okay, let's talk and get in an interview. You want to find out first, what is a journalist interested in talking to you about? Find out who they are and whom do they work for. Is it a reputable news source? You may not want to be talking to someone from the Howard Stern show. So I would recommend sort of finding out first who they are. Find out what kind of interview it will be. Are you going to be live on television or on the radio, or is this going to be a one-on-one sit-down interview? Who is the intended audience? Are you talking primarily to a scientific audience, or are you talking to the general public? This one is very important. When is the story deadline? Frequently you'll find with people in the media that they work on very short deadlines. You may get a call at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to be on TV the next morning at 7 a.m. So you have to understand that a number of journalists don't work on the typical sort of academic schedule. They're not on a semester or class schedule. And so you need to figure out if you're going to be able to work within their necessary deadlines. And finally, particularly if you're doing an interview for a print source, I would ask who the other sources are. This will help you sort of avoid finding yourself in an ambush type situation, so you can get a sense for what kind of angle the reporter is necessarily wanting to talk about. Sort of along those lines, I think it's important as scientists to sort of step back and think about how a journalist operates, which very often is different than how you as a scientist operates. This was sort of a little bit, not earth-shattering to me, but it did cause me to sort of pause. A journalist is looking for something newsworthy and novel. Oftentimes they're looking for conflict. Often their times they're looking for controversy. A journalist will try to present both balance and perspective, not necessarily just facts. Journalists often in their stories try to make broad generalizations, which may be a little bit difficult for you as a scientist to understand when you're interested in very specific aspects of your research. If the journalist is representing a local media source, so say like the Washington Post, they may be sort of interested in the local relevance of the story. So what does your research have to do with the state of Maryland, or with Virginia, or with Washington, D.C.? This last point about a journalist and their sort of interest in the human side of the story is something that many scientists I found that I talked to are a little bit uncomfortable about. A reporter may not just ask you about your science. They may be interested in why you got interested in science, what motivated you to do this line of research. They want sort of that human side of the story. So you need to be prepared for dealing with those types of questions. Further, understanding the journalist also means understanding how do they get their information. So these are lists of sort of tactics that a journalist will use in getting a story. First, they're going to try to put you as an interviewee at ease. They'll be very friendly and they'll ask the easy questions first to get you comfortable in talking. I'm not sure how many of you have taught before, but you often hear of sort of the 10-second rule when you're teaching a discussion class, where you're supposed to, as the teacher, ask a question and then wait 10 seconds for the response. And that's a long 10 seconds of silence sometimes. Reporters will do the same thing. And so they'll ask a question and then they'll just wait. And then typically as an interviewee, you get a little uncomfortable and you start spilling your guts. So you need to be aware that that is a tactic that a reporter will often use to get you to talk. Sometimes you may be asked leading questions. So instead of something like, how do you feel about such and such, the reporter may ask you, doesn't it make you angry that, blah, blah, blah. Aren't you frustrated that, blah, blah, blah. And so those leading type questions may lead to unfortunate quotes on your part, so be aware of those. Not so much in science reporting, but oftentimes a journalist will pretend to have inside information or will do a bit of background. Again, to sort of give them an inside edge so that you think they know more about the subject than they necessarily do. And I give you the time. I'm not trying to scare you. I see some like horrified looks in the audience. And then finally, oftentimes journalists, particularly sometimes trade journals even, are trying to get that provocative quote. And so they may ask you something outside of your area of expertise or knowledge. Perhaps there was a recent article in Science that was sort of tangentially related to your research. And they want you to comment, but really you don't have any, you may not have any knowledge, you may not have even read it. You don't want to necessarily be that guy who was quoted in the paper saying sort of not so nice things about science that you didn't know anything about. Okay, so now that you know how journalists work, and that you're supposed to pause first before saying, yes, I want to be on TV. If you are cold called, I would strongly recommend to getting the information from the journalist and then ask to return their call before the reporter's deadline. The second point sort of goes without saying, but you'd be surprised. You want to make sure that if you're going to do an interview, that you're going to arrange an appropriate interview location. That means clean your office and make it nice. This is something that may be seen publicly on TV or may be actually written about in the article. Similarly, if you're giving an interview in the laboratory, make sure that hazardous chemicals are put away and things are nice and neat. And then finally, the last and sort of most important step of preparation for an interview with a journalist is to make a list of your main talking points. There should be no more than 3. And you want to make sure that you have sort of all your facts and figures prepared to support those main talking points. I strongly recommend in sort of figuring out your message, anticipating any difficult questions, and maybe even rehearsing those with a friend or a colleague. just so that you are prepared. As my art teacher in high school said, prior planning prevents poor performance. The 5 Ps, remember those. Okay, so with respect to those talking points, how can you effectively communicate your message? I thought this was a very apropos quote, especially since I came into sort of doing media outreach from a background in teaching. And this is from a professor who has a blog. She says, "It's very different from teaching. When you teach, you have lots of opportunities to say things in several different ways till you are sure to get the point across. In an interview, you get one shot to sound intelligent, or not." Again, I'm not trying to scare you, but there are things to think about, and it sort of reinforces the fact that preparation is the key. In sort of doing that preparation and crafting your message, you need to be true to yourself, think about how you want to engage the public, and also how you want to appear. So I sort of have this spectrum, I think, of personalities that have appeared on TV. From Bill Gates, who oftentimes appears sort of super nerdy and awkward and sometimes has a difficult time getting his point across. Although he did okay on the Daily Show last week, I think. I saw that interview. Versus Jack Hanna, who I'm not sure how many of you have seen him on Letterman, but is overly exuberant, enthusiastic, and then sometimes kind of looks like a buffoon. So I encourage you to sort of think about being true to yourself, but in a way, engaging the public as best you can. And when you're communicating that message, there are sort of 3 C's that you need to keep in mind. First, you need to be concise. Use short words and sentences. The average soundbite is no more than 20 seconds. The average television story is no more than 80 seconds. You want to avoid fillers and ums and ahs and don't ramble. I encourage you to be conversational. Pretend like you're talking to your grandma. Don't use all these complex acronyms and scientific jargon, and please speak slowly. And then finally, be catchy. Use clever and colorful sound bites, use analogies. Visual aids are a fantastic thing to bring with you. So whether it's a picture, a bug, a weed, whatever, that's going to help you communicate your point most effectively. These are some other sort of hints that I have. Oftentimes, particularly if you're doing a broadcast interview, it's very easy to get distracted by the camera, the crew, all the people around it, so you may not actually be paying attention. So you need to focus on the person asking the questions, pay attention to their questions, and pay attention to your response, instead of jumping sort of 3 seconds ahead and trying to anticipate their next question. You should realize that when you talk to a journalist, there's no such thing as off the record, so anything that you say or do is fair game. Oftentimes people hear about sort of they can say no comment. That's never a good answer. You should explain exactly why you can't comment on something specifically and sort of expand on why you can't comment. Please stick to your area of expertise. This will keep you out of a lot of trouble. If you don't know the answer, say that you don't know, and offer to find someone who knows or to look up information and get back to someone. Please be honest. And then finally, when you're talking to the media, be friendly. Be positive and be very enthusiastic about your topic or your research. You may feel in your first media interview that you have absolutely no control of the situation, and you'll feel when you're finished that, oh, I did such a bad job. But you actually have more control than you think. And I encourage you to think about those politicians on the Sunday morning talk shows. They stay on their message and they hit their message early and often. Frequently, they repeat themselves. And that repetition, saying the same idea in several different ways, is the key to being heard. And like those politicians, they may be asked a question. They may not exactly answer that question, and then they always sort of bring the focus back to their main point. And that's something that you need. It takes a little bit of practice, but with some practice, you too can do that. Okay, so all of those hints and tips have to do largely with any interview, be it for the print media, digital media, or the broadcast media. I have a few additional comments for being successful for an on-camera interview. The first, and this may be very difficult, is to relax and be natural. At least when you're being interviewed on camera, you don't think about the millions of people that may be watching you out there. Just focus on the interviewer and potentially just the camera, and then it's a lot easier to relax. You'll want to maintain a straight posture and assume an open appearance, so don't stand there with your arms folded and hunched. And it's important to make eye contact. Now that with whom or what depends on the situation. If you are sort of in a situation where the person asking you the questions is in New York and you're in Washington, D.C., you need to make eye contact with the camera. because you won't see that person, you'll just hear them in your ear. However, if you're doing an interview with a reporter standing there, you don't want to look at the camera while the person over here is talking to you. You want to make contact with the interviewer. It's important to project your voice and be conscious of your tone. Keeping the distractions at a minimum is very important. I would suggest wearing sort of conservative clothing, nothing with stripes or polka dots and crazy colors. Same thing goes for jewelry and nervous habits. So if you know that you're a hand talker and that you like to make all kinds of things, you do not want your hands in front of your face and you need to keep them down. It's okay to use your hands a little bit. But these are just sort of things to keep in mind. And then finally, have fun and don't forget to smile. Oftentimes people do that and they come off very, very serious. When you give a successful interview, there'll be a number of benefits. First, this is really, we get very excited at my organization that you've made a contribution to the public understanding of science. You've done a good job promoting your organization and your research. And then finally, you've established yourself as a reliable and reputable source. And odds are you will get asked back. And so it sort of allows your sort of media outreach to snowball in a way. I just have some information about our public policy office. This is our website. We very soon are going to be producing a small guide for scientists about how to speak to the media. This is my email address. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I'll also be going to the luncheon. And then one other source, the National Association of Science Writers has a very nice website where they talk about how scientists can most effectively interact with the media. And I think we have a discussion period, so I'm happy to answer questions.
Michigan State University, how do you deal with an interview that you know revolves around a controversial issue?
Right, that's a question that we get a lot. I would say our office typically says if you know sort of who you're going to be talking to first and find out if you're going to be in that situation, be ambushed. And my first recommendation is try not to get yourself in a situation. So Bill O'Reilly calls and he wants to talk to you about, puts you up against a creationist and you're an evolutionary biologist. That might not be a good situation to get yourself in. However, should you find yourself in that situation, I think it's important just to sort of stay on message, answer questions, don't be hostile. Make sure that, watch your language. So if a person asks you, if your interviewer asks you a question in a way that's sort of phrased or leading, be sure, one, not to repeat their phrasing so that you're re-emphasizing their point, but then to sort of be very clear and direct in your answer. If the situation gets super hostile, I think it's okay for you to say, you know, this isn't what I was here to talk about. And you know, this is gonna stop. It also helps if you know that you're going into a situation that could be a little dicey. Having your university's public information officer there is a really good idea because that person is trained in sort of exit strategies for those types of situations. So I mean, it's really important that guys like, you know, not to be harping on Bill O'Reilly, but some of those CNN, CNBC shows that have a lot of hype, those guys aren't necessarily in news and information. They're there for entertainment. And so you may be on there and it's oftentimes people who go on those shows, and even, like the Stephen Colbert show or the Daily Show, people go on there thinking that they are going to get their message across very clearly and that they may be that person to change someone's mind. But on those type of shows, they're not really necessarily interested in changing someone's mind. They're interested in sort of the entertainment value, and you need to be aware of what you're getting yourself into. And so I think the first thing is just sort of recognizing who it is you're going to be talking to. Does that help?
I just want to thank you for coming, Holly. I very much enjoyed your talk. Working in D.C. there, and I think part of our interest in having AIBS address us is, as weed scientists, we typically don't get the message out effectively, and it's kind of I don't know if there's a specific question, but how do we approach the media to get our message out, even let's say about our meeting here, the fellows that were awarded yesterday, and we're kind of trying to start over from scratch here a little bit. And if you had some just successful or general tips that you could help us with, how long would you have to get a press release out, or how many weeks before, to get them to pick it up? What's the turnaround time?
I should know more about I think a couple weeks is sort of appropriate. I know things for like getting press for meetings. I would target local, find out who the local news organizations are, so if you're going to be in a particular area, and typically the media like free things, and so give them free passes to come into your conference. A lot of organizations I've seen have a press room where they organize sort of quick briefings about the sort of hot topics going on with me. So topics of general interest to the public, so things like invasive species, I can see from lead scientists, biological control issues. Those topics that are sort of hot button issues tend to attract the most attention.
You mentioned a press kit beforehand.
So typically that just means that you have information for a schedule of events, you have a press release, you have, and then any kind of information sort of about a briefing or contacts that people can talk to. Press briefings or press kits that I've also seen have quotes, stock quotes that are involved, so less work for the interviewer, for the writer to do. I would say that, and then sort of developing sort of on a bigger picture scale, developing a database of people who are interested in your stories, who have sort of, who you've talked to before are good people, so that if something exciting is happening, you can send out a quick email to those groups. There are a number of sort of websites like Eureka Alert. Those are actually emails that go out that go to those particular groups. Relationships with the media can be a little bit dicey. So if you, as Joe scientist, you think you're doing really cool research and you really want to get your story out there, constantly emailing a reporter or calling your local NBC affiliate over and over again is not going to get you that attention that you want. And so that's where I really strongly recommend working with professionals, public information officers, PR people, to sort of get that message out. Because if you're really pesky, they won't bite. I definitely recommend, one thing that was very effective at the University of Maryland when the periodical cicadas emerged is we had a group of entomologists who came together, and we had organized a bunch of outreach activities, and we sort of decided we were an organized group. We made ourselves available online, all over the place, to talk about the periodical cicadas and sort of decompress people, and sort of having this media blitz around a really exciting event. I think I saw on your website you have a weed awareness week coming up, so something like that, a big event to get folks to rally around, is a really good place to start. And so once we started doing that work with the periodical cicadas, I did an interview with CNN, and they liked me, and I hit their sort of demographic that I've been their go-to person to talk about any insect question that they have. And so once they find you, they tend to sort of keep calling you back. So.
It seems like at a lot of these conferences that the only thing that will really draw the media in is if you have a famous keynote speaker, and then they'll come in groves. I wonder if you have any comment on that.
Yeah, I think, again, this goes back to just sort of framing the work in such a way and the information that's going to be presented to make it of interest and sort of valuable to the public. And so that may be what draws people in. And so if you do have some big-time person coming, then capitalize on bringing those people there, and then make accessible to the media some of the really other exciting things that are going on. And relate it to an interesting public policy issue, to sort of an important funding issue, federal government action, those types of things tend to, making those connections tends to be most useful.
I'm Jody Holt at University of California, and I've been trying to figure out how to put this in form of a question, and it kind of goes along with what Jim said. And having been interviewed a couple of times on the phone by a reporter who wanted it yesterday and been misquoted badly, and having one time Joe DiTomaso, who was at Cornell, call me in California and say, "You said that?" And, how do you just avoid this situation where the person, you've given a lot of good things in your talk to avoid this, but I just feel like I've been burned, and so I'm really cautious when a reporter calls.
Yeah.
And I often just run them away.
Yeah,
and I don't want to do that.
Particularly if you're talking about a dicey issue where you think that your language is really important, or how you phrase things, I would recommend asking an interviewer, if this is for a print media, to have them send you a list of questions and then respond to their questions in writing. That way you can make sure that you are properly quoted. If you find yourself misquoted, which does happen, or you find yourself that you've said something a bit unfortunate. I think I had a quote once that said, "Oh my God, the smell," and that went out on the AP all over, which is a little bit, that wasn't as bad. You could call the editor of the reporter who had written that story, or write a letter, but unfortunately, for science type stories, this sort of corrections of that nature tend not to happen as much. And so it's understandable that you get burned, but know that there are a lot of really good science reporters out there, and that most of them, most of the time, do a really good job. And so, you know, you could also, I would say too, that if you're really concerned, make sure that you're talking to a science writer and not somebody on the local beat who was an English major in college and made a biology course but maybe didn't. And that may help sort of allay some of your concerns and your fears. Thank you.
Can you ask to see their copy edit before they turn it in?
You can, but most of the time you won't. That people ask that question all the time, and because we're working on such tight deadlines, because it's not the article will often go through so many people, several editors. The person who writes the headlines is not the same person who writes the article. Odds are you won't be able to see it, and so that's why preparation before the interview is really the key. So most of the time you should be prepared that you're not going to be able to take a look at the article before it goes out.
This is a question that actually I might direct to both you and to Lee Van Wyken as well. But in the biological sciences especially, and I've had this discussion, I have a cousin that's a PhD in physics, and he's the first to say that we deal with variability a lot. And so, and oftentimes both the press and the policymakers particularly are interested in that soundbite, that one fact, when often we have a qualifier, a very important qualifier. So how would you address that sort of issue, either with, you know, for you, for the media, and then for Lee, for the policymaker side? How do you emphasize those to get the real point of your information across?
I mean, yeah, I understand as a biologist myself that variability is out there. That's again where sort of careful crafting of your message is important. And so you need, yeah, so it's a hard one actually. But I think it's okay, and you should be upfront and honest that there's variability here, but then this is where you say your main point, you qualify that with, well, there's some variation. Maybe put in an analogy though, where showing that to relate it to some thing about just the world in general, not the world in general. But do you get what I'm saying? With where some kind of an example where variability may sort of be an issue, but it's not really, and then return back to your message again, so that you've at least there made the point across that yes, there is a bit of uncertainty, but we are pretty sure that this is the result.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, when you're dealing with science versus politics, I mean, you know, I've seen some things, you know, on the Hill when I was working there that are just completely almost contrary to the facts. But as a scientist, as long as you stick to the facts, so it comes down to sometimes your advisors as a graduate student and what you want to say and what you can actually prove that you can say in your manuscript. That is the science, and that's what our society represents. Now, in my job, I can take that science and I can present that to the policymakers, and that's as far as I can go with it. If we have a number of people, the vast majority approve that, it's going to be a lot harder for the policymakers to go against the facts that are out there, because the facts do stand up in the end, and we can take a poll on global warming or climate change right now just in this room, and I mean, the policymakers out there, I mean, some of them completely agree, some of them don't. I mean, you might have just seen there was a article or a letter signed by like 2,500 scientists, on the fact that global warming is happening. So, again, I mean, the science, if you're in the academic side, I mean, and you have to present your research in the most factual way possible, and then, when you're up there, when you do have the chance to interact with your politician, I mean, you want to give them the facts. I mean, that's the best that we can hope for.
And that's something actually with respect to the facts. Particularly if you're speaking on behalf of an organization or an institution, you have to be careful and make sure that you stick to the facts and you're not interjecting some of your own personal opinions or politics into your message. If you're speaking as an individual, sort of as a scientist, we still speak to the facts first and try not to wax on about